The purpose of every video game is to make the world it presents be real. The player must be able to have their own autonomy within such realm, and that's exactly what Ueda was shooting for when he developed Eco. Around 2001, the concept of AI in video games was very popular, and Fumito Ueda wanted to bring it to the next level. Instead of simply affecting the NPC's behavior, Ueda desired something that involved forming a direct connection between characters in-game. By watching a commercial involving a woman guide a child through the woods, he came up with the holding hands mechanic. The original Prince of Persia also gave him a lot of inspiration when it came to creating the theme of wandering through a castle. Ueda ultimately had 3 goals in mind, which included making a game unlike any other, featuring an aesthetic that was consistently artistic, and creating a setting that was imaginary yet real. There were many hurdles that Ueda had to overcome, including that a hardware he initially wanted to work with, the original PlayStation, wasn't compatible with the game. However, after 4 years, he finally finished Eco for the PS2. Considering that the game was very different compared to traditional puzzle platformers, Ueda worried that the title wouldn't be accepted positively by players. This was thankfully not the case, for Eco was very much well received. It managed to be a tech demo of the PS2's full power by being one of the first games to utilize bloom lighting, and the brain-tickling puzzles and atmosphere were praised. Perhaps, if there was one setback, the North American box art is probably the ugliest seen to all of mankind, and that did cause the sales in that region to plummet, but other than that, Eco was an unanticipated success and was a solid head start for the PS2 in terms of being one of the first console exclusives. But by the year 2024, there are many games like Journey and Flower that use the same ideas and implement them better. Of course, this leads to the question, is Eco still the classic that it once was in 2001? And the answer is obviously no. It has quite a few aged mechanics that have failed to stand the test of time. That being said, I'd also argue that there's some merit in returning to this game. In fact, a lot of the gaming culture we respect today, like indie games and titles like Dark Souls, can be traced back to Eco. Furthermore, Ueda's use of subtractive design allowed Eco to utilize certain elements to create a different experience. Basically, through its simplicity, it stands apart from other titles in a way that feels more innovative even by today's standards. Take the story for instance. Despite only having about an hour worth of cutscenes, Eco still finds a way to emphasize the narrative by integrating it with the gameplay. In the opening, we see a young boy named Eco being taken away to a far-off castle to be sacrificed. The reason? He was a boy with horns, which his culture deems to be outcast. Before he could be properly sacrificed, Eco manages to escape from his container and meets a young girl named Ueda, who is also trapped inside the confines of the castle, considering that she was to be sacrificed to give her mother a new body. The two of them try to escape. However, they're hunted down by the Queen and her henchmen known as the Shadows, who will stop at nothing to capture Ueda. If you think that's a simple story, then you're right. Eco is very basic in its premise. But even by taking away dialogue, Ueda still manages to articulate the relationship between Ueda and Eco. They both speak completely different languages, which creates a barrier between the two of them, yet the game still manages to show certain levels of chemistry they share. Both Eco and Ueda are being prepared to be sacrificed to the same entity, so they have a common enemy. The fact that gameplay involves you holding Ueda's hand all the time forces a player to care for her. It kind of uses the ever-so-hated escort mission to tell a story. You develop a special bond with Ueda that I struggle to articulate into words. You never want to leave her out of sight, and you can't help but make sure she's always following behind. It's kind of like one of those inseparable pairs, like Ratchet and Clank, Jak and Daxter, and Banjo-Kazooie. Eco and Ueda are just so compatible with one another that there's something incomplete if these two weren't together. In fact, whenever you do leave Ueda behind in a room long enough, you'll hear this. Eco might not be a horror game, but nothing is scarier than hearing your loved one being kidnapped right behind your back. Because of this, it forces you to be protective of Ueda. I'm sure there are some people that find this design choice to be constricting and inhibiting. After all, it sounds like all the elements that are despised about escort missions. That being said, it's genius at the same time. One of the most integral parts of any story is to show, not tell, and despite how simple it is, many narratives don't understand this basic concept. For Eco, the game shows the relationship between the protagonists by having a big part of their character growth be structured around Eco solving puzzles or fending off shadows to navigate Yorda around the castle. By subtracting cinematics, Ueda found a unique way to develop the story through the gameplay, thus making Eco feel innovative compared to other titles that were more standard at the time. The character animations also say a lot of their personalities. With Yorda, her in-game mannerisms seem to demonstrate a childlike curiosity. When you are stationary in the garden adjacent to the entrance gate, she might run around and observe the different torches, almost as if she's wondering what these are and why they are here. When she climbs down a ladder, she does so very slowly, like she's unfamiliar with it. Whenever Eco tries to get her to leap across a pit or climb up a chain, she paces back and forth, studying it carefully. It emphasizes how she's newborn and this entire world is unknown to her, which makes it more of a necessity to guide her. If I were looking at this as any other game, then Yorda's slowness would be a problem. However, because Ueda was more concerned of the experience Eco presented, Yorda's weaknesses are meant to characterize her. Eco, on the other hand, clearly has more familiarity with these objects than Yorda does. Therefore, the game depicts him as an older brother figure. The way he extends his hand when she's about to make a leap, or how he motions for her to come near him whenever he's at a distance, it's all meant to demonstrate his empathetic nature. It's interesting to note that the setting also accentuates the weight of their friendship. As beautiful as the outskirts are, usually a lot of the landscape consists of nothing but open sea, which shows that the castle Eco and Ueda reside in is separate from the rest of society. Therefore, the castle halls are empty without a single life form to be seen except for the shadows that pose a threat to them. This lonely, isolated environment emphasizes how both Yorda and Eco need to look out for one another, considering it's not safe. Of course, the only other character left is the Queen. She gets even less screen time compared to the protagonists. However, her presence is felt from the castle atmosphere. The Queen is depicted as someone who's aging and weakening despite being very powerful. Likewise, the castle is very majestic in its scale. However, a closer look would reveal that a lot of its parts are crumbling. The entire place is hollow, and a lot of its structures like chandeliers and towers are shown to be fragile. The fact that Yorda can interact with a lot of its inanimate objects through her magic demonstrates how she can restore life to the dying citadel, which is akin to how the Queen needs Yorda to gain a new, younger body for herself. Through all this, you can see how Ueda's design through subtraction created a new experience in terms of storytelling. The risk was that the story would be reduced to nothing more than a simple framing device. However, by integrating the story with other elements like gameplay and atmosphere, he still found a different way to say a lot by using so little. The player feels like an active participant in the narrative of Eco instead of passively watching it.
But wait, Dave Reviews, doesn't that unique style interfere with the gameplay? After all, the controls are awkward, the combat is thoughtless button mashing, and the jumping isn't very fluid.
Well, yes, technically all of that is true, but Eco at its heart is about solving puzzles to navigate a girl through a castle, and this is where it shows its true strength. On the surface, Eco seems to use the same elements over and over again. You've got the blocks that you can push around to give you or Yorda leverage, you've got the chains that Eco can climb on, and there are multiple torches that he can light up with a stick. A more in-depth look, though, will show that it's not all that straightforward, because the game will use the environment to create different scenarios with these elements. In one of the earliest puzzles of the game, there are several bombs laid out before a weak vertical pull. The problem is that there's no source to light their fuse. Entering one of the higher levels will reveal that a chandelier is hanging on the ceiling. Climbing up and hitting it will make it fall to the bottom, which then provides fire on the floor where you left the bombs. This is how every puzzle in the game involving explosives plays out. But the game tries to change it up a bit later by making Eco throw the bomb after he lights it in order to have it reach a weakened structure separated by a gap. Some may complain that the game's hints are too subtle to the point the puzzles are obtuse. However, that is the beauty behind Eco's gameplay. Feeling your way through the dark reinforces the concept of being lost. So much for a game that's about holding hands, when it doesn't hold your hand all that much. Har har har. The game might also take repeatedly used elements and use them in a different way. In the waterfall, Eiko reaches a stream. On one side is a block. A careful observation will reveal there's nothing to use it with. The only thing that looks possibly interactable is the river. So, you push it out, and after stopping the stream, it shows up in one of the lower levels of the area, in which it's later used to give Yorda a boost to activate the gate leading to the next section. It's counterintuitive to push a block into a river since we've never used those items in such ways up until this point. But this is how Ueda makes the world of Eiko interactable. Using the few resources on screen, the game makes you experiment in a trial and error kind of way. It makes you connect A to B and B to C, and voila! Long rope means extra length, so there must be a higher up window that leads to the room where I can push the block down to let Yorda through. Swinging on chain plus boy equals extra force to knock a bridge over. It's all about the logic, and these brain ticklers add an extra layer of subtlety to an otherwise simple game. And yes, Eiko is very basic in terms of its scope. There aren't any collectibles or secrets to be found. There's a lightsaber that you can find by knocking a ball out of a tree and throwing it into a bowl. This actually improves the lackluster combat by killing shadows in one hit, and it also extends whenever he holds Yorda's hand, which is another indication of the relationship they hold. The game is also really short, with not much of an incentive to play again unless you want to see the watermelon scene, which is very sweet, but not enough to make a second playthrough worth it. It's true that Ueda used subtraction to create a more fulfilling experience, but he maybe did away with too many things to the point a few areas were lacking. The final point I want to touch is the atmosphere, because my god, this game is beautiful. But a big part of how it manages to achieve this is through the lack of music. It actually makes running around in the castle scary, having nothing but the ambience of the air to keep your ears occupied. Now, the OST isn't completely absent. As a matter of fact, the few tunes that do play are actually quite good. The music when saving is one of my favorites since it's so relaxing. The Shadows' theme gives off a sort of creepy vibe, which is fitting since they're trying to kidnap your girlfriend. To have the silence be broken by Yorda's sudden gasp and the odious and cryptic tone of the sinister music really makes me sweat and panic. It reminds me that even in the quietness of the castle walls, danger still lurks within. But even after opening the castle gates, the duo still isn't safe. Despite the fact that they hoped to find solace and escape, they end up getting themselves separated and nearly killed. As soon as the doors swing open, they absorb a lot of Yorda's energy, refusing to let her leave. Every time Eiko tries to pull her hand, she stumbles. Then, when they finally reach the middle of the bridge, beams of energy restrain Yorda, preventing her from crossing. Suddenly, a gap starts to emerge, which forces Eiko to jump across. He only barely manages to catch her hand. This instance shows a reversal of roles. Throughout the game, it had always been Eiko that had been leading Yorda. He had always been the one that had caught her when she was trying to leap across a pit. The fact that she was now doing it for him demonstrates that she now trusts him so much that she feels the need to return the favor. As she's apprehended by the queen, Eiko falls to the ocean below. The next time we see him, he's out in a forested area on the outskirts of the castle. Previously, we could just barely make out this area from within the building. Now, you've finally done it. He is finally free. However, Eiko couldn't simply leave Yorda behind. He had to go back and save her. It's at this area of the game where there's more of a difficulty spike. This entire section has Eiko traverse a gauntlet of platforming challenges that feel like more complicated versions of what was seen previously in the game. It really emphasizes the wilderness isn't any safer and might be even worse compared to the castle's shelter. Eventually, he finds the Queen's Sword, which is the same weapon his native people used in the beginning of the game. Apparently, the blade can open the same doors that Yorda could activate. Progressing a little further will cause the player to run into Yorda surrounded by several shadows. Eiko fights them, warding them off. However, none of them make an attempt to attack him. Previously, they'd always hit Iko to get him out of the way, but now that Yorda is in the Queen's clutches, they see no reason to strike. They also have horns on their head like Iko. This basically shows that this is what happens to all the horned boys. They are sacrificed into shadows. It makes you feel sympathetic towards the enemies you've been killing all this time. They were never evil to begin with. All they were doing was the Queen's bidding. Taking care of them will allow you to face off against Her Majesty herself. One of the defining moments in this part is when Iko loses his horns, which is symbolic of him freeing himself from the confines of the system. But once the actual fight starts, some subtleties begin to emerge. Every time that Iko loses his sword, he'll start calling for it in the same way he calls for Yorda. The sword is also the only thing protecting him from the Queen's attacks. Again, similar to the previous instance, this can be seen as Yorda protecting Iko in return for all the times he has protected her. Even though Yorda is still trapped in stone during the battle, she is also participating in a more figurative way. And in a somber final scene, as the castle crumbles to the ground, Yorda carries Iko out of the ruins and into a boat to safety. The song, You Were There, plays, and it's a really beautiful piece that represents the relationship between Yorda and Iko. The lines, the island bathes in the sun's bright rays, distant hills wear a shroud of gray, is meant to define the castle. In a way, it's like an island cut off from the rest of the world, a place where the unfit are exiled. During the refrain, it goes on to state the lines, Slaves to our destiny, I recall a melody. The usage of the plural pronoun our demonstrates how Yorda and Iko are one. Finally, in the pre-chorus, the song talks of a foreign word, nonomori, which is thank you in Yorda's language. This demonstrates that she's the one singing it. It's a very sweet song describing the gratitude Yorda feels towards Iko, and the game ends with Iko washing up on a beach. Walking a few meters will reveal that Yorda hadn't perished at all. How she washed up on shore and get to where Iko was is vague, but the brevity of this scene makes it feel truly conclusive and emotional nonetheless. So, what to make of it? Is Iko too simple for today's standards, or is it a gem in the rough? Well, by all accounts, Iko shouldn't be a good game. The controls are too loose, the combat is janky, and Yorda's AI can go drown in a river. So yeah, it hasn't aged all that well. But at the same time, Iko has this charm I can't quite explain. For every aspect that Ueda decided to subtract from the final product, he managed to meld something together very uniquely. Whether it be using the simple gesture of holding hands to develop the protagonists, or the poignant way it creates atmosphere by simply cutting out music, it really presents itself as really creative, despite the fact some of its mechanics are lacking. Even in the gameplay department, it's not totally devoid of quality, as a lot of the puzzles are well thought out and good at presenting different situations. Not to mention that this game inspired quite a few of the best games in the industry. The relationship between Ellie and Joel in The Last of Us is synonymous to the one between Yorda and Iko. Hidetaka Miyazaki states that there would be no Demon Souls without Iko. It's also Johnny Greenwood's favorite game. So Iko has a lot of cultural impact. It really is a game I quite respect for its strong influence on the direction of the gaming industry. Basically, it took a lot of the hated elements of gaming like the escort mission and lack of depth and somehow managed to make it good. It truly is an unprecedented stroke of genius. But let me know in the comments below what your thoughts of Iko are and whether you agree or disagree. Remember people, let's keep it civil, and I'm Dave Reviews, signing out.